Think about how frustrating it feels to work hard, putting in hours of effort, only to feel like nothing sticks. You've reviewed, reread, and recited, but when it's time to perform, everything seems to vanish. Sound familiar? Now imagine walking into a classroom feeling fully prepared. Picture the confidence of truly understanding the material, knowing you'll remember it when it matters most. It sounds ideal, doesn't it? But for most of us, achieving that level of clarity and confidence isn't easy. This story is about a student who struggled with the same issues. No matter how hard he tried, his results fell short. He felt as though his friends had some secret formula for success that he just couldn't figure out. Then, he met a mentor who taught him that sometimes it's not about studying harder, it's about studying smarter. The mentor shared 5 transformative lessons, not just study tips, but guiding principles that changed the way he learned and led him to real success. Today, I'll share those same lessons with you. They can help you break free from habits that may be holding you back and discover a new level of focus and confidence in your studies and in life. So, if you're ready to make a real change, let's dive in. Each time the student sat down to study, he felt as though his mind was a tangled mess. Even though he wanted to focus, thoughts of all kinds seemed to creep in. He'd remember something he forgot to do, replay a conversation from earlier in the day, or worry about what the upcoming exam could mean for his future. His mind felt chaotic, and no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't seem to quiet it. When he shared this with his mentor, the mentor nodded with a smile. "You're trying to focus on your studies, but your mind is filled with noise," he said. "To see clearly, you need a calm mind. Imagine trying to read a map while running. Everything becomes a blur." To make this more visual, the mentor picked up a glass jar filled with muddy water. He handed it to the student and said, "This jar represents your mind. Notice how, when it's shaken and disturbed, the mud clouds the water. Thoughts, worries, distractions. They're the mud. When it's swirling, it's impossible to see through." The mentor asked the student to place the jar down and let it sit still for a few minutes. As they watched, the mud began to settle, falling to the bottom and leaving the water clearer with each passing moment. When you allow your mind to rest and settle, it becomes like this clear water. Distractions fall away, and clarity takes their place. The student watched the jar with fascination. He could see now how important it was to clear his mind before attempting to study, but he wasn't sure how to bring this into his daily routine. The mentor then introduced him to a simple breathing exercise. "Let's try something," he said. "Sit quietly, close your eyes, and take slow, deep breaths. Pay attention to each breath, letting it fill your lungs and then releasing it. Focus only on your breathing, and if any thoughts come up, acknowledge them and let them go. Bring your focus back to your breath." The student did as instructed. At first, his mind continued to wander. He'd start focusing on his breath, but quickly find himself worrying about an assignment or replaying a memory. But with each breath, he brought his attention back, gently guiding his mind away from distractions. After a few minutes, he felt a calmness washing over him. His shoulders relaxed, and for the first time in a while, he felt a sense of quiet focus. The mentor explained, "This simple practice of clearing your mind is like setting the stage for focused study. It allows you to let go of everything else and be fully present with what you're learning." The student began to incorporate this practice into his daily routine. Each time he sat down to study, he'd spend a few minutes doing the breathing exercise, allowing his mind to clear. At first, it felt unfamiliar, but over time, he found that he could settle into focus more quickly. His sessions became more productive, and he could study for longer without feeling mentally drained. Reflecting on this practice, the student realized it wasn't just about studying, it was a life lesson. He found himself using this technique outside of his studies, like when he felt overwhelmed or needed to make an important decision. The ability to calm his mind had given him a new sense of control and clarity. The mentor's words stayed with him. "Whenever you face a challenging task, start by calming your mind. Like the jar of water, when you let your thoughts settle, you'll find clarity and focus." This small habit can make a big difference in how you approach not only your studies, but life itself. The student often found himself lost in thoughts that had nothing to do with what he was trying to study. Each time he opened his book, memories of a poor grade would come rushing back, filling him with doubt. Or his mind would jump ahead to the next big exam, and he'd feel a wave of anxiety about whether he'd ever be prepared enough. It was like his mind was caught in a time loop, swinging from regrets about the past to worries about the future. Seeing his frustration, the mentor recognized what was happening. "You're trying to focus, but your mind is jumping to things you can't control, the past and the future," he explained. "What you need is to bring your attention to the here and now, to focus on the present moment." The mentor then took a small candle and lit it, placing it in front of the student. "For the next few minutes, I want you to focus only on this flame," he said. "Let everything else fade away. Let go of any thoughts about yesterday or tomorrow. Just let your attention rest on the flame." At first, the student found it difficult. His mind kept pulling him away. He started to remember mistakes he'd made on previous exams and felt the pangs of regret. Then he'd shift to worrying about upcoming tests, wondering how he'd ever manage to get everything done in time. But each time, the mentor gently reminded him, "Return to the flame. Be here, right now." The student tried again, taking a deep breath and focusing his gaze on the candle's steady glow. Slowly, he felt his other thoughts begin to quiet down. With each breath, the memories of past mistakes and fears of the future began to lose their grip. He started to feel a sense of calmness settle over him, his mind becoming more focused and his thoughts less scattered. After the exercise, the mentor explained, "The past is over and the future is yet to come. When you study, focus only on this moment, on the task directly in front of you. If your mind starts to drift, simply recognize it, let the thought go, and gently bring your attention back to what you're doing." The student was intrigued by the power of such a simple exercise. He had never considered that his energy was being drained by thoughts of the past and future, leaving little left for the present moment. He decided to incorporate this practice into his study routine, using the flame as a way to center his mind whenever he found it drifting. Over the weeks that followed, he discovered a profound shift in the way he studied. Each time he noticed his mind wandering, he gently redirected his focus back to his work, refusing to get caught up in regrets or worries. This habit of returning to the present transformed his approach to studying. He found that he could engage more deeply with what he was learning, understanding it on a level that he hadn't been able to reach before. The mentor observed the change in his student and shared a final insight. When you give your studies your undivided attention, you're not only learning more effectively, you're also training yourself to be fully present in whatever you do. This is a skill that will serve you well beyond school, in every part of your life. Reflecting on this, the student realized that the lesson wasn't just about studying. It was about finding peace and focus in a world full of distractions. He understood that he had the power to bring himself back to the present moment, no matter how many thoughts tried to pull him away. The mentor's parting words stayed with him. "Remember, the past is gone and the future is yet to come. The present is the only time you have to truly make a difference." The student had always approached studying the same way, by memorizing everything he could. He'd read over his notes, repeating words, facts, and formulas until he could recite them perfectly. It felt like a safe strategy, a way to prepare for exams. But time and time again, he found himself forgetting almost everything shortly after the test was over. The knowledge he'd worked so hard to retain seemed to disappear as soon as he no longer needed it. Frustrated, he shared his struggles with his mentor, who listened intently and then gently offered an insight. "You're focusing on memorizing, but learning is so much more than that," the mentor explained. "Real learning happens when you understand something deeply. Memorized knowledge fades, but knowledge that's truly understood becomes part of who you are." To illustrate this, the mentor brought out two simple objects, a sponge and a stone. Holding them up, he poured water over both. The water soaked right into the sponge, but it ran off the stone, leaving it dry. "Your mind should be like the sponge," the mentor said. "When you understand what you're learning, the knowledge absorbs into you, just as water soaks into this sponge. But if you're only memorizing, it slides away, like water on this stone." The student felt the weight of the comparison. He realized that he had been approaching his studies the same way he'd approach a short-term task, getting through it just enough to pass. But knowledge that doesn't sink in will eventually slip away. "Understanding is the key to retaining information," the mentor continued. "Think of each concept as a story, a process, or a piece of a bigger picture. The more ways you can relate it to other things you know, the more likely it will stay with you." The mentor shared some practical techniques. He suggested that the student rephrase new information in his own words. "If you can explain it simply, it means you understand it," he said. He also recommended drawing diagrams, which could help the student visualize processes and concepts, and making connections between the new material and things he already knew. "When studying science," the mentor said, "try to picture the process in your mind, or relate it to something you've experienced. Imagine how cells interact in a body, or picture energy moving through a circuit. And when you're learning history, don't think of it as just dates and names. Think of it as a story, a drama with real people facing real struggles. This way, you're not just reciting facts, you're experiencing the material. It becomes real to you." The student took this advice seriously. Instead of mindlessly repeating facts, he began visualizing concepts, trying to connect them to things he cared about, or already understood. Studying started to feel less like a checklist of information to cram, and more like an exploration into new ideas. He found himself getting genuinely curious about the subjects, asking questions, and digging deeper. Gradually, he noticed that his retention was improving. Not only could he recall information for longer, but the concepts felt more intuitive to him. When he'd explain them to a friend or a family member, the words flowed naturally, and he could see connections he hadn't noticed before. This new way of studying felt less like a burden and more like discovering something meaningful. The mentor watched his progress and offered one final piece of wisdom. Knowledge isn't about knowing everything word for word. It's about grasping the ideas so well that they become a part of your thinking. Don't memorize like a machine. Study to understand. Let each piece of knowledge sink in and become a part of you, and you'll find it stays with you, far beyond the test. As he practiced this approach, the student realized that learning with understanding wasn't just a more effective way to study. It was a richer, more enjoyable experience. He could see how each lesson, each piece of knowledge, was shaping his perspective, helping him to grow not only as a student, but as a person. The student frequently found himself daunted by the sheer volume of material he needed to study. Each time he sat down, he'd open his books and feel immediately overwhelmed by the massive stack of notes, chapters, and assignments in front of him. No matter where he started, it seemed like there was always more to cover than he could handle. The weight of it all left him stressed, and as a result, he struggled to retain any of the information. One evening, exhausted from another unsuccessful study session, he admitted his frustration to his mentor. "No matter how hard I try, it's just too much. I feel like I can't handle it all." The mentor listened carefully and offered him a simple but powerful strategy. Break big tasks into smaller, manageable pieces. Imagine trying to eat a large meal in a single bite. You'd choke. But if you take small bites piece by piece, eventually, you'll finish it, without feeling overwhelmed. To demonstrate, the mentor handed him a large block of wood and a small chisel. "Try to break this block all at once," he instructed. The student took the chisel and tried his best to break the block in one go, but it was impossible. The wood was too solid, too big to be broken apart with a single blow. The mentor then took the chisel and began to work away at the block, one small piece at a time. As the student watched, the block slowly started to come apart. "See," the mentor said with a smile, "it's not that the task is impossible, it's that you're trying to tackle too much at once. When you take it piece by piece, it becomes manageable." He explained that this same principle could be applied to studying. When you look at everything you need to learn all at once, it's like looking at this giant block of wood. Of course, it seems overwhelming, but if you break your study material into smaller sections, you can focus on one part at a time. Inspired by this, the student went back to his study materials and decided to break them down. Instead of aiming to complete an entire chapter in one sitting, he divided it into sections. Each day, he'd focus on just a small part, one chapter, or a few key concepts. He'd then take a break to rest his mind before moving on to the next section. Over time, he noticed a significant difference. Rather than feeling exhausted and discouraged, he felt a sense of accomplishment with each small task he completed. As he continued, the material felt less daunting, and he found that he was able to concentrate more fully. The information stayed with him longer, and studying felt less like an uphill battle and more like a series of achievable steps. The mentor saw his progress and added, "The beauty of breaking down tasks is that each small step brings you closer to your goal. Progress might seem slow, but each piece adds up over time. When you focus on one thing at a time, you're not only reducing stress, you're also building confidence with every little milestone you reach." As the student continued to practice this approach, he found that he could actually enjoy the process. He no longer felt defeated by the workload in front of him. Each small victory gave him momentum, making the larger goal feel attainable. By the end of the semester, he was amazed at how much he had covered, simply by focusing on one step at a time. Reflecting on this lesson, the student realized that it wasn't just a study technique, it was a life lesson. Large goals, whether academic, personal, or professional, are best achieved one small step at a time. He understood now that persistence, when combined with patience, could help him achieve even the most challenging of goals. The mentor's final words remained with him. "Don't try to do too much at once. Break down big tasks into smaller, manageable pieces. This way, you can keep moving forward without feeling overwhelmed, and each small step brings you closer to success." Despite his best efforts, there were days when the student felt like he was getting nowhere. He would pour hours into his studies, only to feel as though he wasn't improving. His grades weren't rising as quickly as he'd hoped, and frustration would creep in, making him question if he should keep trying. "Maybe I'm just not cut out for this," he thought. "What if all this effort is for nothing?" The mentor, noticing his discouraged expression, understood what was happening. "You're putting in the time, but you're hoping for results too quickly," the mentor said. "Progress doesn't always show itself immediately. Sometimes it takes time for hard work to bear fruit." To illustrate this, the mentor took out 2 small seeds. He planted each in separate pots and placed them side by side on a sunny windowsill. Each day he watered one pot regularly, giving it the attention and care it needed to grow. The other pot, however, was left dry and unattended. Over the course of the week, the student watched with curiosity. In the watered pot, a small sprout began to emerge, slowly stretching toward the light. Meanwhile, the seed in the dry pot remained hidden, showing no signs of growth. Success is like this plant, the mentor explained. If you give it the attention and care it needs consistently, it will grow. It might take time, and you may not see it happening right away, but with persistence, it will eventually flourish. But if you neglect it, or if you only give it effort now and then, it will remain nothing but potential. The student watched the plant and considered this lesson. He realized that his approach to studying had been similar to the unwatered seed. He'd focus intensely for hours, expecting instant results, and when they didn't come, he'd feel defeated. He began to understand that it wasn't just about the intensity of effort in one sitting, it was about the consistency over time. The mentor continued, "The key isn't to put in hours all at once and hope for instant results. Real progress comes from doing a little each day, steadily, over time. Even if you study just a bit every day, those efforts add up. Think of your knowledge like this plant. It needs regular care to grow strong and healthy." Encouraged by this, the student committed to a new approach. Instead of expecting immediate improvement, he focused on creating a steady study routine. Each day he set aside a manageable amount of time, knowing that these small efforts would accumulate. He no longer pressured himself to see results overnight. He simply focused on showing up consistently. With time, he noticed small but meaningful changes. His understanding deepened, his ability to concentrate improved, and his confidence grew, not only in his studies, but in his own resilience. He could feel himself growing stronger, more disciplined, and more capable, even if the progress was gradual. One day, the mentor smiled as he watched the student at his studies, clearly more at peace with his routine. "Remember," he said, "progress is not always a straight line. There will be days when you feel like you're moving backward or standing still. But if you stay consistent, if you keep watering your knowledge with steady effort, you'll see the growth you're working for." The student realized that the lesson extended far beyond his studies. Persistence, he understood, was a skill that would serve him in all aspects of life. He began to apply the same approach to other areas, realizing that a little bit each day was the key to long-term success, whether it was in academics, relationships, or personal goals. The mentor's final words stayed with him. "Don't give up just because you don't see progress right away. Growth isn't always visible at first, but with time and persistence, it will come. Every small effort you make is like watering this plant, each drop contributing to something bigger, something lasting." After applying each lesson from his mentor, the student experienced a profound transformation. His grades improved, but even more importantly, his confidence grew. Studying no longer felt overwhelming. Instead, it became a chance to learn and grow. Seeing this progress, the mentor shared a final thought. "These lessons weren't just for studying. They're principles that will guide you in life. Clearing your mind, focusing on the present, truly understanding, breaking things down, and staying persistent. These are habits that lead to success in any area." Reflecting on this, the student realized these lessons went far beyond academics. They were skills to overcome challenges in every part of life. Now it's your turn. What habits might be holding you back? How can these principles help you become the best version of yourself? Remember, this isn't just about studying. It's about living each day with purpose and focus. Take these lessons with you and start your journey toward becoming the best version of yourself.